reaction to the fall of Babylon. And what's going on in heaven? All of heaven is cheering at the fall of Babylon. And they're rejoicing. The angels are singing about the fall of Babylon. And the point John is making is, God's will is that the Babylon fall. Whether or not you find it a tragedy or a comedy is up to you. Because if you're invested in the kingdom to come, you find it a comedy. You find joy in the fall of Babylon. If you're invested here, of course that's a tragedy. Because all of your investment now is lost. You get the point. So to this end, this whole idea, and I really want you to try to grasp it, the whole idea that your life, you can't change the events of your life. You can't change where you were born, who your folks are, what kind of health problems you're going to face, what kind of setbacks in life and relationships and all kinds of things you're going to face. A lot of those things are largely set for you. But you can have control over whether or not those things are chapters in a tragedy or in a comedy. And to that point, I want us to look at this passage here, this little snippet from the life of Jacob and of Rachel. And I want you to, in it, allow me to kind of elaborate on this idea. First of all, and this is almost an axiom, I fall short of saying it's an absolute, but it's about as absolute as I want to be, I guess, with something I see. But life is a tragedy for those who are proud. Okay. Let's look at the first part. Let's look at 16 to the first part of 18. Again, in our passage here, Genesis 35. Then they journeyed. The they here would be Jacob and his 4 wives, count them 4, and all kinds of cattle and children, all kinds of people. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was still some distance to go to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. And it came about when she was in severe labor that the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." And it came about as her soul was departing, for she ended up dying, that she named him Ben-Oni. Okay. Let's think about Rachel for a minute. Try to rehearse what we know about Rachel. Rachel was what? Rachel was attractive. The Bible says she was very attractive. She was also wealthy. She was born to a wealthy man. Her father was a wealthy man, and she married a wealthy man. She married a man in Jacob who was very good at making money. Okay? And she had the love of Jacob. So she had a pretty good life. She was wealthy, she was attractive, and she had the love of her husband. Jacob adored her. But what we find from Rachel's life is this, that she was desperately unhappy. She was. She was very, very unhappy as a woman. And there are several reasons for this. The principal reason why she was unhappy was this bitter rivalry she had with her older sister Leah. Some of you remember that Leah was her older sister, who the Bible says was not terribly attractive. And you remember that Lot did not want to marry the younger daughter before the older, and he got Jacob drunk on his wedding night and just threw Leah into the tent. And Jacob ended up marrying Leah and Rachel both. And the Bible says that God saw that Leah was not loved by her husband. And so to reward her, to help her, he opened her womb. And she started having little baby boys like it was her job. I mean, she had baby boys like crazy. She had 6 of them. And Rachel was having none. She was barren. She couldn't have any kids. And this very, very much vexed Rachel. And she hated her sister for it. And you might remember they had all kinds of, there were some weird tales in there, how they were trading fruit and produce and stuff to have a night with Jacob. Man, it's messed up. And there's at one point where she actually came to Jacob and she said, "Give me a child or I'm going to die." That's what she told him. "Give me a baby or I'm going to die." She was very, very unhappy. Well, God eventually gave in to Rachel. And of course, Rachel had a boy, and his name was Joseph, who became the powerful ruler in Egypt, of course. But what's funny is, as soon as she had Joseph, and the midwife told her, "You've had a baby boy," she said, "Good, I want another." That was the first thing she said. She's like, I could have 6 more to beat my sister. It's like, we gotta start having some boys. We can start having babies in here. So she was that. She was also desperately unhappy because she held on to idol worship for a long time in her life. She kind of grew up in a home where there were idols. And you might remember when she was forced to leave home, Jacob said, "We're getting out of here," that she stole her father's idols. And she kind of clung to idol worship for a long time in her life. And she was also just very discontented. She was never happy, and Jacob had a really hard time making her happy. Well, what's interesting to me here is that when the very thing she was desiring, when she got it, is the thing that killed her. And when she got what she finally wanted, she had another son here, Benjamin, who we know as Benjamin. When she saw that it was killing her, she despaired of it. The very thing that she thought was going to bring her happiness, when she got it, she despaired of having it, right? And she named this child the son of my sorrow. Now, obviously, I don't know what childbirth is like, and I don't want to pretend that it's easy. I know mothers in here, you know otherwise. And I'm not discounting how much pain she probably was in as she was giving birth, but it was unjust to name her child in that way. It was somewhat selfish. Now her life, Rachel's life, ended up being Romeo and Juliet. It was a tragedy, when it could very well have been Cinderella. She could have had a life, if she loved God and she loved God's will for her, that she would have been extremely happy and content with all the things God had given her. But she was bent on her life being a tragedy because she was proud. And she had an idea of what she wanted to bring herself happiness. The point I want to make here is that we should never make our joy conditional. Okay? Hear that again. You should never make your joy conditional. You should never make happiness conditional. And the reason why you should never do that is because you have no control over the conditions. And if you say, well, I'm only going to be happy if, or I'm only going to have joy in my life if, that's a gamble. Because you may get those things. It may be that what you desire in one aspect of your life, God does too. And just by coincidence, you may end up having those things. And you end up being happy and full of joy in that area of your life. But invariably, there's no way that your desire that you have born here on this earth, with your sinful flesh and everything else, is going to perfectly coincide with God's desire in every way. And so, in some point in your life, you're going to end up being frustrated, and you're going to be unhappy because what you want for joy is not given you by God. That's a dangerous gamble. It's not a good thing to do. Think of God's conversation with Cain. You remember when Cain and Abel both gave sacrifices to God, and God took Abel's because it was a blood sacrifice, and he rejected Cain's because he sacrificed fruits and vegetables. Remember that? And you remember how Cain was very upset that God rejected his offering. He said, I gave God the best that I had. I don't keep animals. I grow vegetables. I gave him the very best. And he rejected it, and he was upset. And he was stewing to himself like a little kid stews. You remember God came and very lovingly had that conversation with Cain,